Do you ever feel like a developer just forgot to include a tutorial? It's Rell, and let's dive into Dark and Darker, Ironmace's slow-paced fantasy dungeon delving extraction looter. My first impression was pretty awful. Class selection was great, and then it went downhill. Once I'm in, I click Start to dive right into it. Please select a region. Okay, so I click on the map, where regions usually are, but no, we have to select a server. This wasn't a huge hurdle, but an unnecessary speed bump. I went from excited about playing to confused about menuing. Even if it's just a second, it takes you out. Also, if you're gonna make me pick a region before I play, just have it as a startup option. And match your language. Either make it please select a server or select region. Next, I get a pop-up asking if I checked my loadout and talking about team gear score, none of which have been explained to me. So I look through all the menu names. None of them mention a loadout, so I start clicking through them. Okay, the stash has it, but I don't really have anything to add to, so I guess I'll just ignore the warning message for now. Well, I do like the inclusion of the request a night, or a guide, on Discord option. I will firmly stand on the hill that a game should be playable without third-party programs. Alright, now let's dive in. I get a loading screen. The art on the loading screen is totally gorgeous. And I'm dropped into a moderately sized dark room with a bunch of people with glowing lights on them hitting each other. About 5 seconds later, I'm thrown into another loading screen, which has some more great art. I'm dropped into a map with my fists out and a goblin charging towards me. Then for some reason he stops and turns around. Okay. I have no idea how to draw my weapon. No explanation from the game. I see the word tab in the top left and a backpack. Opens my inventory. My weapons are equipped, but I can't seem to draw them. At least I have the directions on how to split and drop items, a feature I didn't use once in my entire time playing. Now if you look at the bottom right, there's a bar with numbers and icons on it, and all you gotta do is hit the corresponding number. But the bar is so faded, your eyes aren't drawn to it. Again, this didn't take me too long to figure out, but getting dropped into a PvP-enabled dungeon with a 15-minute timer ticking down, and losing 20 seconds because the game couldn't tell you how to draw weapons, is not a great first impression. I engage my first enemy, the toughest goblin ever. Just look at all the arrows sticking out of his head. Or sticking out of the air above his head. And as much as I make fun of it, it's both humorous and a good indicator to the player that their shots are doing damage. Then I get stabbed in the back, because we can't just have a standard intro to combat. We've got to immediately pile on 4 enemies to the player who has no idea how combat works. I get a bunch of shots in, but end up getting taken down. Now I typically think having a player die in the early game, for difficult games, does a great job of setting expectations. But having it be because I had no combat or other tutorial makes it feel unfair. Over the next hour and change, I continue struggling through unexplained systems both in menuing, combat, and explorations. I could continue talking about each little annoyance, but instead, I'm going to give you a tutorial on how to get started. Why? Because this game is incredibly fun once you start to get it. And I still stand by the fact that a game needs to stand without third-party content. The devs really should add a short tutorial dungeon and a guide through the important menus. But until then, I'll provide what I can and add in some tips. Let's start with prepping your character for the dungeon. There's a huge variety of classes, and while they aren't perfectly even, I've seen players do well on all of them. Test them out and find one that fits your playstyle. Next, you can change your active and passive skills by going to Class, then Perks and Skills. You have 2 skill slots and will eventually unlock up to 4 passives. Drag them to the associated slots and test them out. They are a huge boon. Now, go to Merchants, then Squire. Click Base Gear, and the most important menu in the game will show up. This is effectively free starter gear you can bring into a dungeon. It's particularly helpful after you die. A full free re-gear. Also, for some unknown reason, the devs decided that new players didn't need potions unless you happen to find this menu. Just include these in the base kits for everyone. Come back to the screen after every dungeon and fill in the pieces of gear you're missing. Note, after completing a dungeon, any leftover consumables are storable, meaning you get free potions by storing them and claiming a new starter set. Similar to the classes, try out different weapons and armor. The weapons have varied moves, and some of which may suit your playstyle better than others. The Merchants tab is also where you get quests. I don't see any issue with accepting every quest right away and gradually completing them. Once you have started gathering gold, the treasurer can sell you more space-efficient ways to store it. Place the money pouches in your stash before selling, and the coins will autofill them before going to your inventory. Now, let's dive into the dungeons. The maps will rotate between solo, duo, and trio every 3 minutes. All you need to do is pick the party size that best suits you, and it will auto-change the dungeon when it rotates. The timer for map rotations generally corresponds with when expeditions start. If you wait until just after a switch, you can get about 3 minutes in a waiting room to test out your weapons before you dive in. The loading screens have tips. Pay attention to them. It's not the best form of tutorial, but it's better late and hidden in tiny text than not at all. The game really shines once you get the hang of combat. You remember that goblin at the start who walked away from me despite looking right at me? It's because enemies aggro on proximity, not sight. Moving slowly and letting enemies come to you can help prevent getting overwhelmed. You have 4 hotkey loadouts for your hands. 2 for weapons, 2 for consumables, with 3 slots each. Make use of them. Different weapons are better suited for different environments, and having your 2 most important consumables on different bars provides even easier access. Attacks and defends are directional. It doesn't just matter if you have your shield up, it matters which way you're looking. Any of the weapon hits any part of you, you will take damage. Weapons have a set move pattern they will attack with. Aim your attacks around it. Watch your enemies, and look in the direction of their attacks while blocking. This is honestly one of my favorite parts of the game. For me, it really added to the immersion. This also helps you use walls and cover to your advantage. If your attack is a straight jab, but your opponent's is a left slash or a right slash, you can place in a wall or objects that block their attack, but not yours. Kiting enemies is also effective. Movement and attacks are slow, giving you time to think and dodge attacks. Strafing and attack baiting can be very effective, particularly against monsters. Headshots do extra damage. Great for taking out enemies faster, but remember to protect your own head. Use your torch. As the name suggests, the game gets dark. Seeing danger before it hits you is extremely valuable. If you must fight in dark spaces, you can throw your torch to free up your hands while still providing light. Each game has a 15-minute timer, but it's deceiving. The last 5 minutes are accompanied by hazards. Locust swarms, icy blizzards, falling rocks. You have to find a way out before the timer fully runs out, or you will automatically die. I would strongly recommend, until you're very comfortable, having an exit strategy when there are around 5 minutes left, because those hazards can really make it hard to find one. The minimap on the bottom right is your friend. You are represented by an arrow. It sometimes blends into the map. Move around and you'll find it. Escape routes are denoted by blue icons. There are several different kinds. Portals, stairs, escape ropes, and lifts. In solos, each one allows one person to escape before closing for a time. Don't be afraid to wait near one for it to reopen. It won't always work, but it is often safer than trying to find another. Red icons indicate a place where you can go deeper. When you're starting out, don't worry about this. Fill your inventory and escape upwards to build up your coffers. Be wary of traps. They're mostly easy to avoid, but will build up chip damage on you if you forget to look for them. The most common are floor spike traps. Enemies are solid objects. Be careful not to let them trap you. Some passages are not passable without crouching or smashing objects, barring your way. If you die or escape the dungeon, you can spectate other players. Use this to get a feel for how other players are succeeding. The game has a ton of intricacies in combat, but those tips should cover the basics. If you're an experienced player, feel free to drop any tips you have in the comments, both for the viewers and also so I can get better myself. Now, I've had an absolute blast with this game once I got good. I'm not actually good, just not quite as bad anymore. However, I definitely had a few quit moments during my initial hour and a half. I think with the lack of tutorial, new players would be fully justified leaving, and I don't want to see that. So, if any of the devs see this, please add a tutorial. It doesn't have to be crazy complex or anything. Just include how to set up abilities and gear, the general mechanics behind combat, and how to escape a dungeon. There are a few minor quality of life changes I would love to see. Selling equipped items. Having to drag items into a cluttered inventory to sell them is not adding anything. Item swapping in inventories. Dragging an item onto another single item should drop the one you are holding and pick up the old one. Having a training lobby where players can get a feel for new weapons and abilities without the pressure of PvP would be really nice. please add a server maintenance message when working on servers. Multiple times I've just been sitting on the connecting screen after a hotfix. Overall, I've got to give the devs props for consistently updating their game and making one of my favorite, new, for me, games I've played in recent times.